Good afternoon. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at Jamer Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a frustrated baker. Those of you joining us live on Facebook, drop your comments and questions for my guest or myself into the comment box, and you'll see me check from time to time. Today's guest is a renowned Southern food historian, cookbook author, what I count as 10 books. I think he says 9, but I count 10. Writer, culinary educator, and storyteller extraordinaire. As he says of himself, I call myself a writer who happens to be writing about cooking, not a cook who's writing about his craft or her craft. He is one of the founding members and past president of the Southern Foodways Alliance. Let's welcome Damon Lee Fowler.
Thank you for having me, Dara.
Oh, it's a joy to have you here and talk with you. And I'm just going to bring up the screen. While I'm doing that, what's on your plate to do today other than doing the show?
Well, we've had a lot of storms, so there are a lot of things down in my yard. So I need to um, change into work clothes and go deal with that. Um, Decide what I'm going to make for dinner just before you asked me what I was going to make for dinner, and I really have no idea.
Well, I sort of lied. I do know. I thawed this half chicken, so I'm probably going to roast that off. Um, I found a recipe to do it in a cast iron pan. I don't know whose it was, Mark Bittman's. And you
Mm,
preheat the cast iron pan
mm,
for a period of time. Comes out really good and it cooks really quickly.
mm.
I'm just learning to work with cast iron. I always ask, at least 99% of the time, about my guests' family table, what they ate, what was the family table like growing up. You were born in Georgia, but you did most of your growing up in the foothills, South Carolina. Is that
That's right.
correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I get a gold star for that. Shows I read and comprehend at the same time. So tell me about growing up and food.
Well, it was very, very deep South Southern. My mother and father were both raised in Anderson, South Carolina. My mother was born in Georgia as well as me. We're the only two members of the family that were. Um, and it was, Southern country style cooking. My mother's family was from the country. They were a farming family, and my grandfather at various times was a farmer and a plantation supervisor, and then he became a butcher, and he started working in the general store of the place where he had been actually the manager of the farm, and he started working in the general store and became the butcher and got to be really, really good at it. He was also a really wonderful cook. Taught my grandmother to cook, and she grew up with raised by her aunts, and they were both cooks, and they were not having her in the kitchen. So when she married my grandfather, he had to teach her how to cook until he died. She stood over him and told him how he was supposed to be doing it.
Okay. And your father was a Baptist minister, wasn't he?
A Baptist minister, yes. Yeah. That was
And
scary.
I'm sure it was. Was it scenes from like Footloose?
I've never actually seen Footloose, but I can just imagine. We had a terrible reputation, my brothers and I, because we were assumed to be wild children, I guess is the yeah.
Terminology. Yeah, got it.
Mhm.
And so was it typical that there was a Sunday dinner that you all sat down to?
Always. And my mother worked too. She was an elementary school principal. And so she was really busy woman. But a minister's wife, elementary school principal, and had three sons to raise. And still, she managed to put this wonderful Sunday dinner on the table. We'd have pot roast or baked chicken. Occasionally, she would do fried chicken. She would have it all set up and she would fry it when she got home from church. Um, so we always had that big Sunday meal in the middle of the day.
I saw in the oral history that your father's mother fried chicken one way, your mother's mother fried chicken another way, and somewhere along the line, was that the impetus for your cookbook, which was um, your second book, Fried Chicken?
Actually, it really kind of wasn't. What prompted that was I was sitting at a dinner table one night and I was contemplating my first book. And I was really not a professional cook at that point. But I was thinking about writing a cookbook because I loved cooking so much. And something was said about Southern cuisine. And an otherwise very sensible friend of mine blinked a couple of times and started laughing and said, Southern cuisine? What Southern cuisine? Fried chicken? Ho, 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 ho. And as I said in the introduction to my first book, pouring righteous indignation and as memory serves a glass of red wine across the table, I slammed my hand down on the table and said, well, hell yes, fried chicken. And what's the matter with it? And what's the matter with us? You know, we're the only cuisine in the world that is renowned for its fried chicken. Every great cuisine has a version of fried chicken. You go anywhere in the world, China, France, Italy, Spain, South America, they have a version of fried chicken. Ours is the only one that's world famous. And why are we embarrassed by that and ashamed of that? And that's what led to the book, actually. I started thinking about that. And I talked to my editor one day and said, I think I have an idea for another book. And she said, okay, what is it?
Well, let me drop back a little bit and tell people that you had your master's in architecture and you were in an architectural firm, which you have relayed to me was like, oh God, what was the show?
Designing Women.
Designing Women, but all you men fit into the characters that were in it. When was the deciding moment? What started? Was it the writing first? Was it cooking classes first that you were doing while you were still working at the firm?
The
Give me a
writings,
timeline.
the writing started it. I was increasingly unhappy in architecture, and I started looking for something creative to do that didn't depend on Savannah, where I was living at the time, or architecture to support me. Where I didn't have to, cater to any of that, because just something creative where I could do what I wanted to do. And they said, write about what you know. And I didn't want to write about architecture. Being a Baptist minister's kid, I surely didn't want to write about religion. So I loved cooking. So that's what I ended up writing about. I had always dabbled in fiction, but never really finished anything. So cookbook just seemed to be a solid fit. And then I started teaching cooking classes on the side. And that sort of took off as well.
I was curious in looking back at it because you had talked about Marcella Hazan. You had the first book was supposed to be Italian. And digging into what you were doing, you studied in Italy for a period of time architecture, didn't you?
I did. Clemson had an overseas program in architecture, and it was in Genoa, Italy. And Genoa is basically the old cities and the only flat part of land there. And the Apennine Mountains brush against the coast there. So there are a lot of steep cliffs and steep mountains. Well, in the 19th century, when they had gas and electricity and were able to pump water, they started climbing the hill with the city. So this house where our architecture school was up in the hill, and the houses in front of it were below the street level. The houses behind it were above the house. So every room had a view. It was spectacular. It was a great place to study architecture, but I spent all my time in the kitchen with the cook, which should have told me something.
Should have told you something then. So the first thing that you thought of in writing a cookbook was Italian, and then you went, somebody else has done that. The doyen of Italian cuisine, which is Marcella Hazan. I keep losing my earpiece here. Tell us more about your relationship with Marcella Hazan.
Well, I got home from Italy and I had all of these wonderful flavors and things that cuisine I'd never had before my whole life. Our cook had given us a handful of recipes that had been translated by the secretary of the school because Ilda spoke no English at all. And so she wrote them in Italian. The secretary translated them, and all I had were about 5 or 6 of her recipes, and no idea how to cook this stuff. And I was doing a preservation internship in Savannah, and stumbled into East Shaver Booksellers. And if you ever go to Savannah, it's an old-fashioned independent bookstore that is just one of the most special places in America, in my opinion. I literally stumbled onto Marcella's first 2 books, and I opened them, and they were so vivid in their descriptions of the method and the technique and the steps that I could actually taste the food in my imagination as I was doing it, as I was reading. And I thought, this is it. This woman knows all of that stuff. And I've got to have these books. So I bought those 2 books. Only a few books that I bought since then, sight unseen, without even opening the cover, was her 3rd book. And Natalie Dupree Cooks for Family and Friends. I walked in and saw that book and said, I want this, and opened it and read later. So anyway, that was how I was introduced to Marcella Hazan. And for the next 5 or 6, 7 years, Marcella's books were my kitchen Bible. And in a very real way, she taught me to cook. So I spent a lot of time with her books. Well, after I was living in Savannah full time, out of school and working full time as an architect, I wrote Marcella a fan letter. And I had started teaching cooking at that point, and I was toying with the idea of the cookbook. And so a year later, she answered this letter. And so I wrote back and said, you must come and stay with me if you're thinking of coming to Savannah, which she, in her letter, had said she wanted to do. So she actually came and stayed with me, she and her husband, Victor. And it's because of Marcella that I had a career such as it was in food writing, because Marcella championed me and took me under her wing. And I'll never forget that they were sitting around my dining room table, and she said, you're not happy with your job. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to teach. And she said, well, is there a place around here where you can teach architecture? And I said, I don't want to teach architecture. She said, you don't want to teach architecture. What do you want to teach? And I said, I want to do what you do. I want to teach cooking. She says, cooking. You want to teach cooking? And she looked at me like I had 4 heads. And I saw her digest this. And then all of a sudden, the teacher clicked in, and she said, okay, first thing is you never stop a talking, because when you stop, they start, and they don't stop again. And then you're in trouble. And so that set up 2 hours of the most wonderful advice. And so from then on, we corresponded. And whenever I would write to her, she'd answer, So we correspond. We talked occasionally on the telephone. And as they were leaving, they had seen my cookbook material. So they said, we're driving to the airport, and all of a sudden we're talking about other things. And Victor in the back seat says, you should send your book to Dana Cowan. She was the food editor at Food and Wine, the editor in chief at Food and Wine at the time. He said she's not in publishing anymore, but she knows everybody in the business. If it's any good, she'll know what to do with it. So I wrote to her. She recommended agents. I wrote to them saying Dana Cowan had recommended them, and that's how I got published. And Marcella actually gave me a dust jacket blurb for that first book, and she regretted it the rest of her life because everybody got mad at her because she generally, as a policy, didn't do that.
Right. Well, what a auspicious beginning for cookbooks, and great connection and a great story. So the first book had a little bit more history to it, Classical Southern Cooking. You did that in 1995. And that was the history and recipes of the golden age of one of America's greatest regional cuisines. I'm reading what you wrote. And tell us about the evolution of, there came, your third book was Damon Lee Fowler's New Southern Kitchen. What was the difference
That was
between the
actually
two?
my fourth book.
Where did I miss one?
Well, Beans, Greens, and Sweet Georgia Peaches was my second book, and the fried chicken book was actually my third. Um, so, um, and they kind of came out close to each other. The fried chicken book came out after Beans, Greens, and Sweet Georgia Peaches. And so then New Southern Kitchen, to explain that one, I wanted to call that one Classical Southern Once Removed, because what it was the sensibility of classical Southern cooking, the cuisine of the antebellum South,
Right.
taken into a modern kitchen. And my editor and everybody else in the world said, Damon, everybody's from the South, and nobody's going to understand that once removed thing about cousins. So just forget it.
Right.
So it ended up being New Southern Kitchen.
And so the difference between the first one was more historical, and this was a contemporary look of what's going on in Southern cooking, correct?
Exactly.
Good. Okay. So I read that the first place that you really started writing for us before you left architecture. I just love this. The paper, it was an opinion rag, as you put it, yokel, local, and vocal.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been fun. You became the food editor there. And when you spent a lot of time in Savannah, and some of your books were based on Savannah, the tables, Southern, let's see. All right, I know it's here. I have it, the Savannah Cookbook.
The Savannah Cookbook.
The Savannah Chef's Table, Extraordinary Recipes from this historic Southern city. What was the difference between those two, or tell me more about it? You spent quite a bit of time in Savannah. What was it, 40 years, 30 years?
40 years I was in Savannah. And I really believe that but the first house I had there was a row house in the historic district. And I really thought they were going to carry me feet first out of that row house and bury me in Bonaventure Cemetery. And little did I know that life was going to take me in a whole different direction eventually. So the Savannah Cookbook actually grew out of what I saw as a really unique kind of Southern cooking that was different from New Orleans. It was different from Charleston. It was just different. It had a whole different sensibility. It stayed more English than Charleston did. And of course that heavy French influence down in New Orleans with the Creoles. but it was just a unique cuisine, and I really wanted to share it, and I wanted to explore it. And one of the things I read was Eugene Walter's Cooking of the South in the Time Life series, and he spent a lot of time in Savannah, and he talked about three or four, even five iconic things from Savannah that were just iconic Southern things, and then didn't get the recipes for them. So I thought, well, this doesn't work. So I wanted to sort of explore and share that cuisine with everybody, and I wanted people to see um, that Savannah was a whole lot more than Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. There was a whole lot more to it than that.
Right. The one of the things, just to let people know, that first book of yours, Classical Southern Cooking, was nominated for a James Beard, nominated for IACP Award. And I explained to people, IACP, International Association of Culinary Professionals, which was really, that organization was initially started by cooking teachers. Natalie Dupree was
Yes.
involved with that. But it grew into food photography, cookbook authors. There were many divisions and groups in there. So those are the two cookbook awards that you want to get or be nominated for. There's nothing really else that shines the light on cookbooks. Okay. One of the books you were involved with was Dining at Monticello. And tell us more about that. And then I'm going to bring up a point about that. Oh, before I forget, Lenny Sorensen says, hello. Phew, I finally found the link. Hi, Damon. Lovely to see your face.
Oh, Lenny's lovely. And it's this just the right moment. Lenny was a part of Dining at Monticello
Really? Okay.
in a real way. She was the director of African American Studies at Monticello at the time, and said when Dining at Monticello came out was actually when I got to meet Lenny, and she is a dear old soul and just a lovely, lovely woman, wonderful cook, funny, smart. I can't say enough wonderful things about you, Lenny.
Well, I hope she's still there. Okay. That was a phone call coming in. I had a block. I thought I had everything blocked here, but I guess not. Technology. What did you say? Hermione Gingle had something
Yeah,
to say
isn't
about technology.
civilization ghastly?
Right.
I'm just not sure
All
that,
right.
yeah, I'm making sure my phone is completely off too.
Well, one of the things you were talking about somewhere along the line, the supermarkets, and down south, what was offered in the supermarkets was not too vast. It was pretty basic. And one of the things that you led to that in the cookbook with Monticello, they were cooking with artichokes at that time. So we were aware of what Jefferson brought in, many things, including the ice cream. But I thought the artichokes was an interesting point to point out.
Some of the things that Jefferson is credited with bringing in, he actually didn't, but he popularized them. Or also, Jefferson kept copious notes of everything. That man made a record of every single thing that happened in his life. And so he made a record of what they were growing in the garden at Monticello, as few other people did. So he often gets credited for introducing things that he didn't necessarily really introduce.
Okay. But artichokes were there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a very broad question, and we've sort of touched on it in different things, but what is Southern food?
Oh, goodness. Southern cooking is really it's really more of a feeling than it's hard to pin down. Um, it's basically a Northern European based cuisine that was literally transformed by Native American ingredients and by African cooks. And it's a very broad question. So it's a very broad, generalized answer. But Southern cooking wouldn't be what it is today without those African cooks. So there's this very strong African influence on the cuisine and on the way the things are presented. What um, people mention that Southerners do a lot of frying. Well, African cooks were masters at frying. And any place you've got cheap fuel and a lot of cheap fat, and you can, or even when you don't have a lot of cheap fuel, if fuel's a little bit at a premium, but you got plenty of fat, frying is a great way to cook food because you can do it in a hurry. All you've got to do is get that fat really hot for a few minutes, and then in a few minutes your dinner's done. So, and if it's done properly, it doesn't absorb a lot of the fat. The myth that that fried food is heavy is because, most of the fried food we have isn't done well.
Oh, well, I thank you for that. And just a little bit about the Southern Foodways Alliance. There were 50 founding members. You were president at some point on it. And in there are a lot of part of the goal of that is to get the oral histories of what Southern food was about, or the people from Southern food and their point of view about Southern food or how they played a part. And so much of that is coming back nowadays for families. I regret, and I've brought this up, I didn't get my mother's gefilte fish recipe. I sort of hung out on the pasta sauce. I sort of hung out on her chicken soup. But sorry, I didn't get the recipe. And I can't stress enough to get that family recipe, because that food isn't just about consuming food, it's about a living memory. And that alone, if I smell certain things cooking, memories flood in from that food. So those of you that aren't keeping track, or get your mom's or grandmother's recipe, you got a phone, record it. You don't have to write it down. Just record it, keep it, and save it to pass on to family members. At some point, you were a short order cook. You were in a Caribbean cafe.
Um, well, it was Caribbean and sort of in name only. When I was waiting for my first book to come out, I had left architectural practice. I was still doing some consulting. I was doing a little bit of tour guiding. I was kind of becoming a jack of all trades and master of absolutely none of them. And this crazy woman who was going to open this little cafe um, that she had decorated with South American and Caribbean artwork wanted me to help her open her restaurant. So I let her sweet talk me into opening the restaurant. I said, well, look around you. We've got to do a Caribbean menu, or a sort of Caribbean / South American menu. So that was what we did. And I did it for about 4 months and got her sort of going. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So I called a dear friend of mine, Ruth Adams Bronze, who was a professional cook. And she was from Texas, this great big redhead, larger than life redhead from Texas. And I called Ruth and said, Ruth, help. And she said, well, tell me about your kitchen. And so I started talking, and she said, well, Damon, your owner sounds a little bit nutso. And I said, Ruth, she hired an architect to run her kitchen. Who in their right mind would have done such a thing? So she says, well, can you lock her out of the walk-in? Knowing she meant the refrigerator. I said, the what? And she said, oh, the reach-in or whatever you've got. And I said, well, we've got two sort of half-working domestic refrigerators and a deli case. And she said, run for the door, dear. I said, no, I can't do that. You know, it's like knowing you need to get a divorce, but when you leave, you're going to have to leave the spouse with the kid, and she's going to kill it. So Ruth got me through those 4 months, and then the book came out, and I had a book tour to do and all of that, and
Yeah,
so that was the end of
just
that.
I just find your life very fascinating and very, as with, I think, just to tell people, we chatted a bit yesterday. Um, so many people that have gotten into the culinary world was not where they were looking to go. They
Mhm.
had many other careers, master's degree as such as you, and then they just, whether it was working in the restaurants during the summer for whatever reason, made that change. And I guess the same for me. I can't say I had a master's in anything, but it was a sideline that became a profession for me. Okay, I want to ask this question. Why the move from Savannah up to Petersburg, Virginia? What motivated that? And I know you're restoring a very historical building and you're very much involved with that. Tell us more about why you moved.
Well, the real reason we moved was my husband that is a church musician, and he was born and raised in Petersburg in Colonial Heights, which is a neighboring. It started out as a suburb of Petersburg, and it became a municipality of its own. Um, and so he has two grown daughters who have adopted me as their bonus dad, and we wanted to be closer to them, and yet we couldn't quite ever make that work. And the church that he served from 1989 to 91 lost their church musician, and got in touch with him and said, I need help. The rector at the time said, I need help. So we had my husband, in the meantime, had fallen in love with this house in Walnut Hill. Walnut Hill is a now historic suburb of. It was the first big suburb of Petersburg.
Peter,
Around late 19th, early 20th century was when it was first laid out. And our house was built in 1942 as a charming Federal Revival style house. And he fell in love with this house and just could not fall out of love with it. And we'd drive by it, and he would say, "Isn't it beautiful? Don't you just love it?" And I would say, "Yes, dear, it's a lovely house, but it's 450 miles from where we live. Don't you think he could fall in love with something closer to home?" Well, no, he couldn't. So eventually, we had a chance to buy the house, and it was on the edge of needing serious work. So we got it for a song. We thought we'll never have a chance to get this house like at this price again. So we took it. And at that point, we were still living in Savannah full time. So we moved into an apartment, moved most of our furniture up here, and we're sort of going back and forth between these two places for several years. And eventually, the opening at Christ and Grace came available, and so Timothy decided that was time to go.
time
So
to go.
we packed the rest of our things and came up here.
Yeah. Well, you have another friend who came in. It said Mary Villapanto.
Uh-huh. She's
Looking good, Damon.
Mary and I sing in the choir together at Christ and Grace.
Well, hello, Mary, and hi to Lenny. And I think Susan Fraser's watching also, from what I can tell.
That's
So
my
hi to.
sister-in-law.
Oh, okay, cool, cool beans. All right. Let's get to the final questions.
Okay.
And before I forget, people, you can find Damon's website, which is damonleefowler.com, and there's a link to his Facebook page as well. Go to the website, look up the recipes and the stories he posts. Looks like once a month, a recipe, and you get a nice little story that goes with it, and plenty of recipes to check out. So those of you who cook like me, check it out. All right, final questions. If you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Be very afraid. No, seriously. I first said I was going to be an architect when I was 4 years old. Well, that's sort of, I don't even remember doing it. I've been told my whole life. I first said I was going to be an architect when I was 4. Well, I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. Well, I would go back to that 18-year-old self and say, son, who takes life choice advice from a 4-year-old? No, do something else. But on the other hand, I wouldn't trade those experiences. So, I went to Italy because of architecture.
That's right. That's right. If you wake up tomorrow morning with a new talent, what would the new talent be?
I've been debating that one. I don't know. I think I would like to be able to dance. I have 2 left feet, and I just never, and I'm very self-conscious about dancing, so I've never really been a very loosey-goosey dancer. And I think I'd like to be a dancer.
Okay. Well, it just needs to get a little bit more of that Southern iced tea with that spiked in you, and then you'll be dancing some more. Okie dokie. What was your ultimate culinary fail?
Probably the worst one was I was having some friends over for dinner very early days as a cook. I had been in Savannah less than a year and a half, I guess. So I was pretty young, like 30, barely 30 years old. And I went to the market and I had this nice fat chicken that I thought, oh, well, that'll be good to roast. Well, it was a stewing hen.
Okay.
That did not go well. It was the toughest thing I have ever tried to, we didn't eat it. We nibbled on the outer parts of it that had gotten tender enough to eat, but basically the thing, it needed to cook for 4 hours in a stew pot.
And those who cook will understand it. Those who don't, you'll understand if you buy a stewing hen and try to roast it.
It won't
It's
go.
old. It's old. It's a more mature fowl. Okay. What are 2 must in your refrigerator?
Butter and butter. Salted
Okay.
butter and unsalted butter. I cook with unsalted butter so that I can control the salt. But there are a lot of things that you just need salted butter for, like toast and good stuff.
I know that Nick Maggi area had a chocolate cake in my refrigerator is salted butter. I barely use it because I just add salt to things when I need it and more controlled. But he did this insane chocolate cake and it had this required salted butter. So people keep a stick handy. You'd be
Yeah.
surprised how good it is. Okay. What's the best bite you've had all week?
In the summertime, I like to make vegetable soup, and I've had a lifelong quest to try to reproduce my grandmother's vegetable soup, which I've never been able to quite do. But I get pretty close a couple of times that it's been pretty close. And hers was a vegetable beef soup that was based on leftover pot roast, basically. Usually she had a leftover pot roast and she would cut that up and put it in. and a little bit of salt pork, lots of okra, lots of tomatoes, and lots of black pepper. But I've never been able to quite reproduce it. The other one is minestrone, a classic minestrone alla romana. And over the years, I've slipped some Southern things into it. Like I always put butter beans and yellow squash in it. So, but there are places in Italy where they put fava beans in it. So
There. Take
they're not
that.
the same. They're not the same, but there you go. So
There.
I would say the vegetable soup. I made a lovely minestrone last week.
Sounds good to me. I had matzo ball soup the other night. I don't care. It's 100 degrees outside. Okie dokie. Damon, what didn't I ask you that I probably should have?
Oh goodness. Um, well, I'm not writing about Southern food anymore, except on my blog.
Well, do you want to answer that question?
Um, I kind of had said everything that I felt like I needed to say. At a certain point, so much of Southern food is so informed by African American cooking, and there's just so much a white man can say about that. Um, but I kind of think I had said what I needed to say, and except for the little blog thing that I do on my website, which I call Recipes and Stories. Um, I really felt like I'd said everything, and it was time to shut up. So I've
Well,
been writing a lot of fiction and hoping to get it published.
right. We'll bring you on when that's all published, but it's basically a trilogy. It's 3 stories. You're on your third book right now, right?
Yeah, I've always toyed with fiction and enjoyed doing it. And I never finished anything. And right after my first book came out, my first cookbook came out, I started writing a historical romance that was between two men. I said, nobody writes stories about people like me, like this. That isn't depressing. Um, I wanted a classic love story that actually had a happy ending. And so it took me 14 years to write it. It was a hot mess, and it still needs work before it will ever be published. But then I started working on my newspaper column one day, my story calendar for my newspaper column, and I had this sharp image of a man standing in a half-empty apartment, looking at an empty closet with a crumpled up note and a ring in his hand, and Val was gone, including the name Val. And that turned into a story about a children's book author and his journey to recover himself. And I finished that book and said, I'm not done with these characters. And I started a second book about them, finished it and said, I'm still not done with them. And I'm 3/4 of the way through the last of the three. I am not going to go on ad nauseum about Charlie Bedford.
Okay. Well, just to remind people, those who tuned in live and those who are going to watch the video, it's DamonLeeFowler.com. The link to his Facebook is there. A charmer. Do reach out. I'm sure he'd be willing to write an article for you for the right price. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And this is a new friendship I look to see grow. Damon, thank you so much for being on the show. And I have a couple of announcements. Be well, have a great rest of the summer, and thank you again for joining us, Damon.
Thank you, Dara. I so enjoyed being with you today.
A pleasure, absolutely. All right, everyone. Next week's guest is Yao Zhou, the founder of 50 Hertz Tingly Foods. He is also known as the Szechuan Pepper Guy. Szechuan peppers are the soul of Szechuan cooking. It's a distinctive spice and tingly sensory experience. It is the heart to a cuisine for years that had been banned. So do join us and we talk about that. And the guest is Yao Zhou, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it properly. If you need to reach me, you can reach me on Instagram at Dara Cooks or on Facebook, The Food Enthusiast. I always advise people you can always go back into the archives and see all the other shows and guests that we've had on. You know, some that we talked about with Damon, Natalie Dupree, John Martin Taylor was also on the show. That's off the top of my head at the moment. So you can go to jameoreliving.com, and on the menu it says food. Click on that, and there's a link to the Food Enthusiast. It takes you to all 293 shows that I have done and interviews. Also, while you're there, sign up for the bi-monthly newsletter, which is all about food that comes out from Jameor Living. We truly appreciate it when you share our show with friends and family. May your plates always remain full. We'll see you next Thursday.